Europe didn't start European. The people who live there today are not the people who built Stonehenge. They're not the farmers who planted the first crops. They're not even the hunter-gatherers who survived the Ice Age. 3 times, Europe was completely remade. 3 separate populations arrived, mixed, replaced, and each time the genetic map was redrawn. If you have European heritage, the DNA evidence shows you descend from all 3 waves, not one, all 3. And the sequence matters because the group that arrived last gave you your language, but the group that arrived first gave you something else entirely. In 2015, a team of geneticists published the most comprehensive analysis of ancient European DNA ever conducted. They sequenced 230 individuals spanning 8,000 years. The results didn't just fill in gaps, they overturned the story entirely. Europe was built in layers, and DNA just revealed what each layer left behind. The first people to repopulate Europe after the Ice Age were not farmers, they were hunter-gatherers. Tall, light-skinned according to genetic reconstructions, blue-eyed. They lived in small bands along rivers and coasts. They fished for salmon, hunted deer, gathered hazelnuts. They buried their dead with red ochre and bone tools. Then someone tested their DNA. The genetic markers these populations carried still exist in modern Europeans, but only in trace amounts. Less than 10% of your genome, if you're European, comes from these people. They were here for thousands of years. Then something arrived that changed everything. Around 7000 BCE, a new population began spreading into Europe from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. They brought agriculture, wheat, barley, domesticated animals, pottery. They also brought different DNA. Genetic analysis shows these Neolithic farmers had darker skin than the hunter-gatherers, brown eyes. They were shorter, and their ancestry was completely distinct. Within a few centuries, they had spread across the entire continent, from Greece to Britain, from Spain to Scandinavia. But the DNA shows this was not just cultural exchange, this was demographic turnover. When geneticists use the term replacement, they are not describing deliberate genocide or planned extermination. They are describing a process that unfolds over centuries through multiple factors working together. Higher birth rates in one population, greater disease resistance, social advantages, access to better nutrition through farming, migration into less densely populated areas. The result is that descendants of one group eventually outnumber descendants of another, not in a single generation, not through violence alone, but through the slow mathematics of survival, adaptation, and reproduction across hundreds of years. This is what the bones record. This is what the DNA measures, population change at a scale that reshapes ancestry itself. By 4000 BCE, the hunter-gatherer genetic signature had nearly disappeared from most of Europe. The farmers hadn't just adopted the land, they had become the dominant population. Then, the third wave arrived. Around 3000 BCE, a new population component appears suddenly in European genomes. It didn't come from the south, it came from the east, from the steppes north of the Black Sea. These were the Yamnaya, horse riders, pastoralists, warriors. They carried a genetic signature that would reshape the continent more dramatically than any migration before or since. In some parts of Europe, steppe-related ancestry replaced up to 90% of the existing genetic profile within just a few centuries. 90%. Let that number land. This is not cultural influence. This is not trade. This is demographic transformation measured in DNA. The farmers who had dominated Europe for 4,000 years saw their genetic contribution reduced to a fraction. The mechanisms are still debated. Disease may have weakened farming populations before the steppe migrants arrived. Climate shifts may have favored mobile pastoralism over settled agriculture. Conflict may have played a role, though the extent is unknown. Social structures may have given steppe-descended males reproductive advantages. What is not debated is the outcome. The genetic landscape changed, massively, measurably, irreversibly. And this is the group that brought you Indo-European languages, the ancestor of Greek, Latin, Germanic, Celtic, Slavic. If you speak a European language today, you're speaking a language brought by the third wave. But your DNA, that's a mix of all three. Modern Europeans are not pure descendants of any one group. You are a blend. Approximately 10% hunter-gatherer, approximately 40 to 60% Neolithic farmer, approximately 30 to 50% steppe pastoralist. The exact percentages depend on where in Europe your ancestors lived. Northern Europeans carry more steppe ancestry. Southern Europeans carry more farmer ancestry, but everyone carries all three. The idea of a single pure European ancestry, which has been used to justify horrific acts throughout history, from colonial expansion to ethnic cleansing, is scientifically false. It always was. No population on Earth is genetically pure. Not Europeans, not Asians, not Africans, not indigenous Americans. Every human population is a mixture of earlier populations who migrated, mixed, adapted, and survived. This is not opinion. This is what the genomes show. Mixture is not the exception to human history. It is the rule. The group that gave you your language is not the group that gave you most of your genes, and the group that gave you agriculture is not the group that arrived first. The textbooks described gradual change, slow cultural diffusion, peaceful mixing. The DNA shows something else. It shows waves, arrivals, demographic shifts so large they rewrote the genetic map. The three-layer model is a simplification, because each wave also mixed. The Neolithic farmers didn't completely erase the hunter-gatherers. They absorbed them, married into their communities, took some of their genetic lineages forward. The steppe pastoralists didn't eliminate the farmers. They mixed, in some regions heavily, in others less so. Modern Europeans are not the product of one origin. You are the product of three origins, three migrations, three genetic backgrounds that collided, competed, and eventually merged. And the evidence sits in your genome, waiting. This research is not about who belongs in Europe today. Every person alive has equal dignity and rights regardless of their ancestry. Modern borders, nations, and identities are not determined by ancient DNA. This is about understanding the deep past, the movements, mixtures, and transformations that shape the genetic landscape of every continent, including Europe. It shows that the people who lived in Europe 10,000 years ago would not recognize their descendants today, genetically, culturally, linguistically. And the people who live in Europe today descend from populations that originated elsewhere. That pattern is not unique to Europe. It is true of every inhabited continent: Africa, Asia, the Americas, Australia. Human history is migration, mixing, adaptation, survival. The DNA evidence doesn't care about modern politics. It doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care about nations. It records what happened: mixing, movement, survival, replacement. The hunter-gatherers survived in fragments. The farmers dominated for millennia, then were overwhelmed. The steppe pastoralists arrived, mixed, and gave their language to populations that genetically weren't even primarily descended from them. And all three are in you. The story of how Europe became Europe is not about superiority. It is not about purity. It is not a moral lesson about immigration or belonging. It is the story of how populations adapt, migrate, mix, and transform. How ancestry is never static. How the people of the past are both connected to the present and utterly different from it. And every single person alive today carries the legacy of strangers who crossed mountains, oceans, and grasslands to reach places they could not have imagined. New genetic studies publish monthly on ancient populations. GenealogyX tracks the research as it emerges. Subscribe to follow the evidence.